welcome. On the 14th of May, health ministers from member countries in the Commonwealth met for their annual Health Ministers Summit. The Commonwealth says this summit was set against the backdrop of a global health crisis. So the meeting's theme was delivering a coordinated Commonwealth COVID-19 response. To talk more about this, we have the pleasure of speaking with the Commonwealth Secretary General, Patricia Scotland. Ma'am, good evening and thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Gulavanaka, it's very nice to be here with you too.
So let's talk about some of the outcomes of the 2020 Commonwealth Health Ministers meeting. What were the intended outcomes, especially this year? As the Commonwealth said, it was set against a global health crisis, and I'm guessing this meeting was certainly different from most other summits that you've had in the past.
Well, the first thing to say is this was the very first virtual meeting that we had ever held. And with most of our countries in lockdown and social distancing being in place, it was a momentous moment for us because we were absolutely determined, the 54 countries, that we would continue to collaborate and come together to share information and to try and help all of our 2.4 billion citizens to get the benefit of our collective knowledge and a collective commitment. We were very lucky because the minister from Fiji made an extremely valuable contribution to our Commonwealth Health Ministers meeting, particularly explaining how the Pacific, who's done an extraordinary job, have managed to contain the virus and to make their people safe. And this opportunity for our Commonwealth 54 to come together created a very powerful platform for our nations to exchange ideas and to scale up the best solutions. And we were able to do that on the back of last year's Commonwealth Health Ministers meeting, which was led by the minister, my brother from Fiji, who started that meeting with the warmth and the commitment and the song that came from Fiji. And during that meeting, we talked last year about the need to come together to create a platform for procurement and to enable us to make sure that no country would be left behind and would be able to get the right equipment that we needed. And that was really prescient. So the aim of this meeting this year was to review the coronavirus response at a pan-Commonwealth, regional and national level. So we really wanted to share the good practices, the strategies, the models, and to identify the priorities for coordinated action. And that's exactly what we did. And the key outcome that made us all so proud was the commitment from our 52 countries to work together to deliver a coordinated Commonwealth COVID response. And the meeting gave such strong messages about solidarity in the current global climate, marked by division and the tendency to look inward and protect one's own. But what we in the Commonwealth know is that for us to keep our loved ones safe, for us to be safe individually, we have to make sure that the loved ones of our brothers and sisters in other countries in our Commonwealth are equally safe. And so the health ministers agreed to set up an open-ended technical working group to facilitate the exchange of information whilst promoting innovative solutions between our member states. And the group also responded to the urgent needs and concerns raised by our members, such as the challenges of human resources and financing. So there was a lot of excellent work done, but we touched on, our ministers touched on the issues of climate change and also, as I mentioned, the need for coordination and not to forget the non-communicable diseases, malnutrition, immunization, malaria, which are priority areas of concern among Commonwealth member governments. And I know that Fiji dengue has been a real concern, with a number of Fijians being grievously hurt by this disease.
Stay with us. We'll have more for you right after the break. We're fortunate enough to be speaking with you at a time when just a few days ago, on Friday, in fact, Fiji was able to declare itself officially COVID-19 free. All of our 18 cases have recovered. There's a 0% death rate, 100% recovery rate. But we've seen that most countries haven't fared so well. We're lucky in the Pacific that most of Pacific Island countries, these small island states, have remained COVID-19 free. But it's of course the economic effects that will likely really hit us hard. Let's talk about some shared lessons and experiences, because what this pandemic has showed us, that it doesn't really matter how well prepared or well equipped your health system is if there isn't a joint coordinated response. Talk to us about some of the shared lessons and experiences, maybe from some developed countries, something that was shared in the Health Ministers Summit from some underdeveloped countries or Pacific Island countries.
Well, the most important thing we heard, and you know this, of the 13 countries in the world who are COVID-free, 10 of them are from the Pacific. And if you like, Fiji has just joined them and becoming the 14th country to be COVID-free. And so what we were looking at was, how did these countries do it? We know we've had a very good lessons, for example, from the Caribbean, who have, through solidarity, similar to that solidarity shown in the Pacific, by locking down the borders very quickly, by implementing social distancing, by following the guidance given by the World Health Organization, they have really limited the amount of damage caused, because all of these countries have been very clear that they are putting the health of the individual members of their communities before anything else. But as you say, that has been at a cost, an economic cost. And so what we were looking at during these discussions, and the health ministers from Fiji was able to describe to everybody else the three-pronged plan that Fiji implemented, but was very much in absolute step with what the Fijian and Pacific Island response was, which was really helpful. But we looked at the need for social distancing. We also talked together about how the Commonwealth accredited organizations could help. So, for example, our pharmacists were very conscious that we didn't have enough sanitizers. So the Commonwealth Pharmaceutical Organization came together to reach out to our countries to look at the indigenous things that are there and how we could use them. So you know that in Fiji, the use of material made from bark, and the way in which they then were able to make the masks, but also looking at the nature of indigenous products which could be converted into hand sanitizers. These sorts of indigenous developments were very, very important. But it was also, how are we going to make sure that we could share data and information to make sure people were not left behind? And it's really difficult, because when we look at the economic cost, you will know that more than 20% of Fiji's economy is based on tourism. The rest, of course, is very highly dependent on fishing. So if you look at to whom Fiji supplies the fish, and we saw this very much also in other regions. For example, we saw it in the Maldives. Maldives are really made up of fishing and tourism, but they sell their fish to European countries, and they have had most of their product going to hotels and going to restaurants. So if you're selling to hotels and restaurants, which are now all closed, then this is having a bad impact. And Fiji will have seen it because, of course, there isn't a lot of inter-island tourism, but there's a lot of tourism that comes to Fiji from New Zealand, from Australia, and from the wider world. So these issues of how we respond to the economic issues are really important. But as I was saying, the other thing people were highlighting is that we must not fail to take account of the non-communicable diseases. So if you look at the problems that we have with heart disease, obesity, diabetes, these issues are equally important. And I think it was a very reassuring opportunity for the developed countries to share the knowledge and expertise that was coming from the least developed and also the small, because this innovation was coming from everywhere. And you remember that most of the larger countries were the first to suffer from COVID. So those of us who came later were able, if you like, to learn from the missteps that others had made. COVID is something none of us have ever seen before. It was utterly new. Most of us had not a clue how to respond to it. So this sharing of knowledge and information and help was critically important, because all of us took the view, if one of us had had a bad experience, we needed to share that so others wouldn't have to repeat the same problem. But by the same token, if one of us had found a solution, we needed to share that also. So this pooling of information from the 54 countries was a very, very poignant, important experience where we realized that multilateralism was critically important if we were all going to survive.
Join us for more right after the break.
The economic fallout of COVID-19, especially globally, it is going to be quite some time before all nations, whether they're developed or they're developing, it's going to take some time for us to get back on par, at least to where we were when we started off in 2020. Local projections indicate a 2-year economic fallout from COVID-19 for Fiji. And if we were to look at how the COMSEC would mitigate these economic impacts and working together with small and developing nations like Fiji, how would you predict that would happen?
Well, I think we've got a good history, but if you look at some of the things that we have already done, I mean, the Commonwealth prides itself on being a voice for small states. So the positions we've taken as a whole in the World Assembly, Health Assembly, which we just talked about, has really helped us to identify what those economic consequences are going to be. And we've been looking at some very practical solutions that I've touched upon in terms of the joint procurement. If you look at the Coronavirus Response Centre and the tracker, it's enabling us to identify the areas where we're going to need as more help as we can. But if you look at the consequences, and we touched on that, tourism-driven economies, like those in the Pacific, will be the worst affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, which we anticipate will bring about sharp contractions in growth based on even a modest 3-month interruption in travel and trade. So the tourism-dependent economies like Fiji, along with Samoa, Cook Islands, Palau, Vanuatu, and to a lesser extent, Tonga in particular, they are forecast to experience a major recession in 2020. Now, in the Pacific, the recent cyclone activity has really compounded the economic impact of the pandemic, damaging some of the vital infrastructure. We've seen it in Fiji, but tragically we've seen it in Vanuatu and in Tonga too. So the services make up about 40% of Fiji's GDP, and it's the third highest amongst the Commonwealth Pacific small island developing states. And much of this tourism has been extremely hard hit. And the IMF has adjusted Fiji's growth forecast for 2020 from 3%, which was the pre-COVID rate, to minus 5.8% after COVID. However, I think there's some good news because we do expect there to be a recovery of about 7%, and that expectation is that it should be there by 2021. Now, Fiji is highly dependent on intra-Commonwealth trade, and in 2018, Fiji sent 40% of its world exports of goods to the Commonwealth, which is about $420 million US dollars. And the Commonwealth provides almost 60% of Fiji's imports of goods from the world. So that's about 1.6 billion US dollars. And its main Commonwealth trading partner is, of course, Australia and New Zealand. So the Commonwealth accounts for around 40% of the cumulative greenfield FDI announcements into Fiji since 2003. And this has created about 2,077 jobs. That's 45% of the total jobs created from greenfield foreign direct investments. So it would be crucial, I think, for Fiji and the other Pacific islands to capitalize on low virus levels and the numbers and prepare tourism, all the tourism sectors, for the aftermath of the pandemic now, because the Pacific is a safe region for people to come to. And the Commonwealth can really assist Fiji in this, because we are in a position to help Fiji to develop and adopt a resilient, sustainable tourism recovery strategy aligned with the new realities that will face international travel post-COVID-19. And we hope this will instill some confidence and demonstrate to the world that they are ready to receive visitors, including through the implementation of a robust health and safety protocols. So everything that the health minister has done is really going to support that economic recovery. And crucial is the recovery of the tourism sector in Fiji would be the continued support of the Commonwealth developed country members, such as Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, who really account for a large portion of the Pacific tourism spend. So as tourism markets gradually reopen, we are really hopeful that these larger Commonwealth member states will favourably consider the Pacific, specifically with regard to the Pacific's ability to participate in regional travel arrangements. Now we're looking, for example, at the trans-Tasman travel bubble between Australia and New Zealand. So Fiji's participation in that would be really interesting. But we're also looking at the connectivity agenda, because the Commonwealth connectivity agenda is something which Fiji has been participating in the supply side of the connectivity cluster, and the Pacific Islands private sector organization, of which Fiji is also a member, has participated in our meetings of the business connection cluster. So the fact that we have a 19% advantage in Commonwealth countries trading with each other, and that we have 20% improvement, we think that there is a huge opportunity. And if you look at what happened after the 2018, or rather the 2008 climatic issues, which were followed by the financial problems we had, you saw how quickly the Commonwealth recovered. So we're hoping that this Commonwealth collaboration and support will help to cushion and help us all to spring back that much more quickly than we would otherwise.
When we come back from our break, we'll talk about climate change and its impacts in the Pacific. wrapping up our discussion on COVID-19 and its response. Earlier on, you stressed the importance of multilateralism, which of course is as important as ever, especially in the wake of this crisis. I'd like to discuss the relationship that Fiji has with the Commonwealth, this group of 50 plus member countries. And because of the way that these countries have developed, or the development level, because of their size, because of their interests, the way that each country sees development and its outlook for the future is vastly different, right? So if we talk about Fiji and how the Commonwealth shares a future with Fiji, talk to us about that relationship. In the wake of COVID-19 and the economic fallout and all of the things that we've discussed earlier, where is this relationship headed in the future?
Well, you know, Fiji has been a phenomenal partner for the Commonwealth. And if you can just think back to the leadership that Fiji demonstrated during COP23 and the climate dialogue, and the way that the blue ocean and the blue Pacific came to the fore in 2016, with Fiji saying not just but to the whole world, we are in the same boat and we have to support one another. We have in our Commonwealth 32 member states who are small. For those 32 member states, climate change poses an existential threat. And the Pacific, with the Caribbean and the small states in the Indian Ocean and the small states in Africa, have been highlighting so clearly since 1989 the impact that climate is having on all of us. That existential threat is real. But Fiji has participated in every agenda. The leadership that Fiji showed in COP23 has continued. You will know, I'm sure, that what your Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, did during that period was electrifying. As a result of Fiji's leadership, we were able to have, at that first Oceans Conference in New York, a meeting where we pooled all of the Commonwealth leaders, led by Fiji, because they were in the chair, to create our Blue Charter. That Blue Charter looked at all the commitments that we had made as a global community and tried to match those commitments with action. And the result of what Fiji did during the Ocean Conference, we then, over the coming months, put together the Blue Charter, and when it came before the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that took place in London, all the then 53 members of our Commonwealth signed up to that Blue Charter. And as a result of the Blue Charter, we now have 10 action groups to which all our member states have been able to benefit. And Fiji is in so many of those in a very important leadership way. But Fiji also was leading with the education. You remember too that Fiji is still in the chair for the Commonwealth Education Ministers Conference. And the Education Ministers Conference, the last one, took place in Fiji in 2018. And out of that dialogue came an extraordinary plan of work. And then, as I mentioned, Fiji chaired the health ministers meeting last year. And as a result of that health ministers meeting, we made a commitment to create the climate, the platform for health procurement and equipment. But we've gone on from that because we are now looking at common sensing, which is an initiative which we are undertaking with UNITAR in the UN, together with the UK Space Agency, Portsmouth University, ourselves, and many others. And what we are looking at is how we can use the data that's coming from the satellites to better plan our resilience program. And Fiji is there with us too, with Vanuatu, with Tonga. So I could just go on and on. So many of the commitments that we are making, Fiji is right there with us. And we have just placed last month, although virtually, a climate finance access advisor. Our climate finance access hub has already delivered for our small states $33.6 million to help with climate adaptation and climate finance mitigation. But we also have more than $517 million in the pipeline. We are hoping that the climate finance advisor, who is now in Fiji, albeit virtually, will be able to support Fiji to make those climate finance applications even more successful, but taking advantage of the work we're doing with common sensing to help Fiji better protect, better plan, better implement what we can do. And we've also got a health advisor situated in Fiji to help with the health legislation as well. So that just gives you a little taste of all the things that the Commonwealth are doing with Fiji. And we had a lot of work. Professor Trivedi, when he was a senior director in our Economic, Youth and Social Development Directorate, spent a lot of time and is still going to be working with Fiji on good governance implementation and implementation on the management process. So as you can see, we are hand in glove working almost feels sometimes like on a daily basis. And we are so grateful for the commitment, the passion, and the leadership that Fiji has given not only to the Pacific, but also the active part that Fiji is playing in the Commonwealth. So many congratulations goes to the government for all that they have achieved with us.
Secretary General, you rightly said that climate change does affect us in the Pacific, especially for SIDS like Fiji, with what happens with severe tropical cyclones, with flooding and with other natural disasters. The one thing that is mainly affected is food security, and we saw that happen earlier on this year with Tropical Cyclone Harold. Looking at plans for the future, how do you see this being addressed by the Commonwealth for plans in assisting in safeguarding food security for people in SIDS?
Well, this has really gone straight up the agenda because you tragically have an intersection of three things. The first, of course, is the COVID pandemic, which has led to the lockdowns. The second is the climate crisis that we are seeing right across the globe that has hit the Pacific with such viciousness. And the third is the economic problems about which we have just spoken. So these problems and the issue of food security has really come very high up in the agenda, and we have to look at it and work at it in a concentrated way. And this is where, if you look at the issue I've just been talking about, which is the Common Sensing project that we have entered into, where we are partnering with the UK Space Agency, with UNITAR and others. This is an area where we hope we can really deliver, because Common Sensing leverages the Earth observation data to provide all our stakeholders, all the people we're seeking to help in Fiji and elsewhere, with access to vital satellite-based information services regarding disaster and climate risk to inform planning, food security needs, and to strengthen access to climate finance. So the satellite Earth observation-based technologies and tools really play a key role in the management of disasters, especially in undertaking population exposure analysis, and the vulnerability mapping for effective disaster preparedness during multi-impact situations like COVID-19 and the cyclones. So this rapid mapping technology, for example, allows farmers to project when best to time their harvests, what type of crop is best to plant at what time, and supports an early warning system that will make a huge difference for disaster response. So going forward, the Commonwealth, in partnership with UNOSAT, will host webinars on rapid mapping and population exposure analysis to help countries at risk of cyclones with the planning of the evacuation and building of strategies. But you know, one of the advantages that we have in looking at which crops to plant is many of our ground provisions, our yams, our cassavas, the things that are root vegetables or buried under the ground, are ways of us maintaining food supply, because of course when the top soils are ravished, the ground provisions are buried quite deeply. And if you can see what many of our indigenous populations have always done traditionally, is they have been reliant upon the fact that the majority of their staple foods were invested in the ground provisions. So, but what the satellite does is really help us to better understand what we should plant, when we should plant it, how we should plant, and where. And that critical information, that empirical data, will really help our farmers and our agriculturalists and our planners and our experts to plan better and to put in place the sort of contingencies that will mean that we will have higher and better quality food security than we had before we had that technical and good data.
We'll come back with our final segment after a short break. Stay with us. I'd like to move on to disaster risk reduction. I believe it was to Reuters that you wrote your open-ended letter, which pointed out a really important issue, something that I personally agree with, the funding for disaster risk reduction. You pointed out that funding has historically been neglected, and in your opinion, what steps should be taken to focus aid more towards disaster risk reduction? And while doing so, just along with that question, how do you ensure that small island states like Fiji still have autonomy over their economic futures while they're being given assistance in disaster risk reduction?
In the past, we were looking at debt as if it was a problem created by the fiscally imprudent or the fiscally ignorant. We know that that is not any longer the case. There's a direct correlation between those countries who have suffered traumatic disasters and those who are still heavily indebted. So it's crucial for all our member countries to look at that reality and to seek to plan long-term strategies to manage the disaster risks and build resilience through disaster preparedness. And our Commonwealth leaders have affirmed their commitment to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the international agreement for mobilizing governments, private sector, and other stakeholders to reduce the risks and to build resilience. And by doing so, I think our leaders are acknowledging that rather than merely responding after disaster strikes, it is more cost effective and prudent to invest beforehand in prevention, protection, and preparation. Yet disaster risk reduction remains relatively low priority for the international development finance. So apart from the costs of post-disaster reconstruction response, of every $100 spent on international aid in the past 2 decades, only 40 cents have been spent on pre-disaster risk management. So if you look also at the field of disaster risk finance, it's really complex and it's evolving and evolving rapidly and making it even harder for our small and our least developed countries to tap into the limited funding available. So the information is very fragmented, and the donors and the lenders often have widely varying procedures and requirements that need to be navigated in order to unlock that finance. And many of our small countries have only 1, 2, 3 people to do all of this work. So bringing some clarity to the disaster risk finance is of critical importance. So to tackle these impediments and to help create a more streamlined and integrated approach to accessing these funds, the Commonwealth will soon be launching a new disaster risk finance portal. Now, this is going to be a web-based platform. It's been designed to make it easier for capacity-constrained governments to gain access to the funding they so urgently need. Because over the years, the Commonwealth Secretariat has listened really carefully to what our countries have been telling us, the problems, the difficulty, the analytical challenges, the difficulty they've had to even get hold of the data and the scientific and other information to help them to make an informed choice, and even to know what supplies that there may be available to them and what the products are. So as well as helping governments to find the disaster finance instruments that are available, the portal will also assist them with identifying those that are most suited to their particular needs and circumstances. So this one-stop shop with the information collated from a range of sources and clearly presented will save governments time and effort and help them to make more informed decisions on disaster preparedness and response. But what we're also doing is we are identifying the focal points in every single one of our countries who are responsible for doing this work. And we are determined that we are going to support those individuals and those agencies to do everything they need to do, but do it better, because we'll have 54 countries supporting each other, as opposed to each of us just trying to struggle on our own. Because not only have we got to better prepare for disaster and better implement the structures we put in place afterwards, but we've got to find the money. And we've got to address the whole difficulty that so many of us have been facing, that we've been identified as either medium income countries or
Madam
high
Secretary General,
income countries. But
pardon me
because
for
of our
interrupting.
vulnerability and our size, we aren't able really to withstand the onslaught that is coming from the multiplicity of dangers that small states now have to face.
Madam Secretary General, pardon me for interrupting you before, but we're just about at the end of our show. We've only got a few more minutes left. As we wrap things up, we'd just like your opinion on this. Seeing as 2020 has seen a complex number of complications and also difficulties and challenges that a lot of countries have had to face, do you think that moving forward, something like the COVID-19 pandemic is going to change the way that globally we address climate change?
Well, in one sense, I hope It does, because what we have to understand is all of these things are integrated and interrelated. If you look at the changes that are happening in the diseases and the illnesses that are coming up now, they are materially different to those that we had to face in the past. And there is a correlation between the changes that have taken place in climate and the nature and quality and spread of the diseases. And as you map climate change, you can map the metamorphosis that's taking place in a number of the diseases and illnesses that we're seeing. Countries which before would kill enzymes or microorganisms because of the cold or the heat are now no longer doing that. So we are having to look at these two issues as not separate, but interconnected. If you look at what's happening climatically, we know that everything that's happening atmospherically is affecting us as human beings. Our activity on the land is affecting our oceans. As our oceans have got hotter, they have no longer been able to be acting as a coolant. So the ocean is now acting as an accelerant. That is why we are getting larger cyclones, larger hurricanes, and the climate change is happening. So I think we need to understand where this pandemic has come from, but we also have to be ready, because we may have to, this may be the first and not the last pandemic. If you look at what's happened to cyclones and hurricanes, we used to say in the Caribbean, and indeed if you look at what we said in the Pacific, that we would expect a Category 5 hurricane once in a lifetime, once every 72 years. We have had more climate incidents and more hurricanes of Category 5 in the last 5 years than we probably had in the last 50. So everything is interconnected. We're going to have to create a more regenerative approach, a really sustainable approach, and we are going to have to be holistic and work together. And that's why in the Commonwealth, we're looking at Common Earth, something which is people-centered, place-sensitive, but holistic in its delivery. So when we're looking at nationally determined contributions, we are now going to have to embed the Sustainable Development Goals in those nationally determined contributions. No more can we compartmentalize the different areas. We're going to have to look at climate and health. And we know that in order for us to be wealthy, we have to be healthy. And I've been saying we have to take the I out of illness and we have to supplant it with the we. Because if you do that, you go from illness to wellness. And so we need all of us working together in unison, and we need to do it now. And I am so proud of what we're doing in the Commonwealth, because we are acting like a family. We are looking after each other. We're supporting each other. We're sharing the information, because the information I've been speaking about, the information which is on our coronavirus response tracker, the information that we're producing from our common sensing and from the other programs that we're putting together in relation to coral that we're doing with Vulcan, all that information we are giving to each other, to our family, for free. So that collaboration, that sharing, that support, that's what's going to keep us alive. So I would say to everyone, work together, support each other. And I want to say such a big thank you to Fiji, to the Prime Minister, to the government, but so much to the people of Fiji for being part of that family, our family, and keeping us all safe.
Secretary General Scotland, thank you so much for joining us. The discussion was certainly insightful, and we hope to have you back someday.
I hope so. And please stay safe and give my love to all of those in Fiji for whom I feel such friendship and warmth.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for on the show tonight. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening.